Hi everyone and welcome. I'm so excited to share the 8 cards I made using the January 2020 My Monthly Hero card kit. So here's a quick overview of the contents of the kit. In the main kit there is a 4x6 clear stamp, 14 coordinating fancy dies, and I was just mostly excited about that sentiment strip, honestly. In the kit there are some specialty cardstock. This month there are 2 of each. There's a dark pink. There is a couple of pieces of craft cardstock and this light shimmery pink. And then a white shimmery or sparkly cardstock. Also in this month's kit there is an aqua glimmer metallic ink, and I just love this color. You also get some pink sparkle embossing powder, and then there was a couple of yards of the pink satin ribbon. Now for this month, the only add-on that I purchased is the Unbearably Thankful stamp set, which I will create 1 card at the end with. I decided to do all of the die cutting beforehand, and so here I have a piece of watercolor paper, and I'm just adding all of the dies, and I will just run that through several times through my die cut machine and use as I need. Okay, for card 1, I'm taking a panel of the Hero Arts Adricatic cardstock that I've die cut down to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and then I took the smaller of the 2 butterflies and I did some dry embossing on that panel. Unfortunately, because I ran it through so many times through my machine, the embossing flattened out, but the panel still shows the impression of a butterfly, which gives that background some interest. For most of my cards today, I watercolored the die cuts, and I'll share the way I did it for this first card, but just know that the rest of the cards were created in just about the same way. It's a very loose and messy technique, and basically I'm just adding water with color and leaving it very splotchy. I do go ahead and let the pieces air dry just to preserve those watermarks. Next, I die cut the embossed panel with one of the Hero Arts rectangle dies, and then I added it to a black matted card base. I do change this in the end, and I'll show that in pictures. I think I seem to have forgotten to hit the play button when I ripped it up and redid it. So anyway, for my sentiment, I am taking the Deepest Sympathy sentiment strip, and I've stamped it out onto a black cardstock, and then I die cut it with that sentiment strip. And here I'm just finishing the card. I've added the die cut of the butterfly that I watercolored to the center of the panel with foam tape, and then I'm taking the sentiment strip and I'm adding that in the center. Later I add the rest of that teal panel back on and just leave a thin border of the black just to brighten that card up a little bit. And then for a couple of final touches, I'm taking the Studio Katia clear drops. I believe this is the mix number 1, and I add that with some liquid adhesive. For the second card, I'm taking several of the die cuts, and I'm going to be doing a little bit of ink blending. I have an ink dauber, and I'm adding mustard seed and a little bit of wild honey on the inside of the die cut. And then I'm taking whatever is left on my peeled paint ink dauber and just adding that to the stems and the greenery. I believe I added a little bit of twisted citron, but overall the peeled paint kind of covered that up and was a bit of a darker shade. For this card, I thought it'd be fun to create a sort of a faux tunnel card. This is my name for it. I don't know if I'm right or not, but as far as I know, a tunnel card is when you open the card, the tunnel box pops up, and this is usually with the little scene inside the tunnel. So this is not what that is. This is a faux version of it, meaning that when you look at the card front of my card, you'll see a bit of a tunnel. And what I did was I took the light pink cardstock, and believe you me, I cringed when I cut into that paper because I have a bit of a hoarding problem with cardstock. And then I used the Hero Arts circle dies, and I die cut one of the larger circles from the top layer, and then one of the smaller circles from the inner layer. Now I messed up a little bit. I was trying to be so skimpy and not cut any extra, so a little bit of the offcut kind of peeks through that one side, but it's okay. We'll just creatively cover it up with those beautiful roses. So I had everything popped up, and then I'm using liquid adhesive to add that into place. I did add in the roses, which partially were popped up with foam tape, and then I'm just adding in my sentiment strip that I've stamped on black cardstock and die cut with the sentiment strip, and that focal image of the larger butterfly, which I am popping up all on fun foam. And then once I figure out my placing, I can adhere that using a little bit of liquid adhesive. And then I'll take the smaller of the two butterflies, and I'm going to add that into place again with some fun foam. So when I finished up with this card, I thought it was missing a little bit of a black element to tie in that sentiment. And so I reached for the Ranger black enamel accents and added a few drops to my card, being careful not to squirt out too much and have it splatter. For card 3, I'm bringing in a Hero Arts Heart Confetti fancy die, and I die cut that out of a 110-pound card white cardstock. Next, I have a piece of vellum inside my Misty, and I'm stamping out the newsprint stamp with gold pigment ink. Now you want to dry this before you start messing with it because it could smear. At this point, I have all of my components ready. I'm adding some liquid adhesive to the back of the heart confetti panel, and I'm adding it to the very bold and bright pink glittery cardstock for just a little bit of pop of color. Next, I have the newsprint vellum piece that I've trimmed, and I've added some foam tape to the back where it's going to be hidden by those flowers. And then I'm just kind of arranging my bouquet of roses using liquid adhesive. And some of that greenery, which is gold color, I kind of like the gold and pink and teal color combo, so that was kind of the inspiration behind this card. And right in that center where all of the roses meet, I'm going to add my sentiment strip, which I have stamped and heat embossed with gold embossing powder. For card number 4, I thought it'd be fun to incorporate an envelope, which I'm die cutting from the craft cardstock from the main kit. Now before I completely adhere the envelope down, I'm going to stamp out the postage stamp image and a little for you sentiment. I've treated the paper with anti-static powder, and then I'm using VersaFine ink to stamp that down and heat set it with clear embossing powder. I'm also taking the newsprint stamp and stamping that out onto a piece of white cardstock, also using VersaFine ink, and then I'll heat set that with clear embossing powder as well, and this will create a little letter for my envelope. For this card, I reached into my stash of Valentine's Day papers that I've kind of accumulated over the last few years, and I'm trying to be better about using up what's in my stash. So far, it's debatable. Anyway, I had this beautiful red embossed hearts paper that I wanted to incorporate, and so I've die cut a panel using a large rectangle stitch die, and then I've added that to my cardstock, or to my card base. I've taken my envelope and my letter and I've popped that up on some foam tape, some really strong foam tape, and I'm adhering that to the center of my panel. No surprise that I white heat embossed the sentiment onto a piece of black cardstock, and then I die cut it with the sentiment strip, leaving the fishtail banners on both sides. So here I decided to do a little bit of last minute splatters just to the envelope. So I took a piece of copy paper and cut it apart so that I can cover the entire panel except for the envelope, and then I've just added some pink and gold splatters. And then finally, I'm adding a couple of the pink roses to finish off the card. Next card, I'm bringing in a piece of slate cardstock by Simon Says Stamp, and I'm treating it with some anti-static powder, and then I'm taking all of the sentiments from the kit and I'm stamping them randomly with Versamark ink. Now, if I had to do this all over again, I think I would make it a little less random. But in the end, I do love this card. This is my favorite card that I created with this kit. So the randomness just does not bother me as much. So once I have all of the sentiments stamped out, I'm going to add clear embossing powder to this panel, and then I will melt that with my heat tool. For this card, the focal element is a white bouquet, which I've die cut using white cardstock, heavyweight cardstock. And then I'm adding my sentiment strip that I've white heat embossed onto the slate cardstock. And I can start adhering my components together. I have the sentiment strip trimmed on a bit of an angle so that when I line up that bouquet, it looks straight. And then I'm adding some flowers that I've colored in shades of different pinks and reds, and I believe a white. And again, I've colored in the flowers using some watercolors, and I've kind of did that whole loose and messy watercolor technique. The flowers I have arranged, the back ones are adhered directly flat down with liquid adhesive, and then the couple of front flowers that I have, I've added some foam tape to pop them up for a little dimension. For this card, I thought I needed a little more red in, so I brought in these clay hearts that are by Honeybee Stamps, and I'm adhering them all over the entire panel just randomly with some liquid adhesive to finish off this card. And I really think it's that color combo of red and gray that makes this my favorite card. For my next card, I'm going to do a little bit of ink smushing using the Aqua Glimmer metallic ink. And this is some pretty thick ink, and I just use a couple of drops and then watered it down, and I'm directly smushing it onto my piece of watercolor paper. And then just kind of trying to get it to move with my brush and a little bit more of that ink. I decided to create some splatters with the ink, with the aqua ink, and then a little bit of white with the Copic white or paint, I think it is. And then I will set my panel aside to completely air dry before I start working with it. While that panel dries, I'm gonna work on the rest of the components, and I've taken a piece of vellum and I've ran that through my die cut machine using the Quilted Hearts embossing folder by Sunny Studios, and die cut the bouquet from that vellum, and then I just used a stapler to hold it together so that I can start working on adhering the flowers. I have the flowers and some of that greenery that I've watercolored with some pretty bright watercolors, and then I'm just randomly attaching those in using a little bit of liquid adhesive. And then the last few flowers I do pop up with some foam tape just to give it a little dimension. For the sentiment, I used Congratulations, and I've white heat embossed it on black cardstock, and then I've die cut it using the sentiment strip, leaving a fishtail banner on both sides. For this next card, I'm incorporating a technique that I recently learned from the very talented Justine Hoovey. She called it a freehand watercolor burst, and that sounds like a really good name to me, so that is what we're going to call it. Basically, you add a pool of water, you kind of just drop it in some clean water, and then you start dropping in your watercolor. Now for my particular card, I only focused on a couple of different shades of purple. That was the look I was going for. So that is all I'm dropping in. Once the first layer of that bright purple is laid down onto the watercolor paper, I go back in with a little bit of clean water and then drop a shade darker so that I can create a bit of contrast on that background. And I do add a little bit of silver, I think it is, in corners here and there. And as always, I do let my watercolor panels air dry to preserve the watermarks, and I feel like to preserve the brightness of the color. So here I'm sharing the way I created the thin frames from black cardstock. There are dies in the market that will create frames for you, and I don't have those yet, so I kind of had to improvise. So basically I'm taking two dies that are very near in size, and I had them lined up on a magnet so that they don't move, and then I secured those with a piece of painter's tape, and I can run that die cut through my machine as many times as I need to create thin frames. and this I probably picked up from Jennifer McGuire. I did die cut the frames several times from black cardstock, and then I just adhered it together using some liquid adhesive. I do go back later and die cut a larger frame that I'm attaching to the outside of the card. And then I'll take the smaller frame and I'll attach it to the inner portion of that panel. I have my 3 die cut butterflies that I watercolored with teal watercolors, and I have those popped up on some foam tape, and I'm adding those just kind of randomly across the panel. I also have the sentiment stamped out with Versamark ink, and I white heat embossed it onto black cardstock. I'm just trying to measure out where I need a little bit of dimension added to the back of that sentiment strip, since the frames that I die cut earlier, I've die cut several and stacked them up. And the last thing that I do to complete this card, I add some of those clear drops by Studio Katya using liquid adhesive. And finally, for my last card, I'm bringing in the add-on that I purchased for this month. It's the Unbearably Thankful stamp from Hero Arts, and I have colored the images off screen and cut them out with my scan and cut. To create the background for this card, I have a panel of the Hero Arts Hero Hues Adricatic cardstock, and I've secured the honeycomb stencil with some painter's tape, and then I secured the entire thing to my work area so that it does not shift. I'm starting with Hero Arts white pigment ink and just adding it sort of randomly across most of the panel, concentrating more so on the middle than the outer edges. Once I have that first layer of pigment ink down, I go directly over that area with silver pigment ink. I'm sort of just pouncing it in so that I don't rub away any of that white layer, and then I covered the entire panel with that silver ink. Because this is pigment ink, you do want to either let it completely dry or hit it with your heat gun to speed up that process. I have my white card base, and I trimmed a piece of black cardstock, and I've adhered it to the sides of the card base. So when I have my stencil background and I trim a little bit on either of the side, and then add that to the top of my card base, that black just peeks through on either side for just a little bit of interest. So here are all my images kind of arranged the way I want them. I have everything popped up on some fun foam, and then I can start adhering all of those pieces down with some liquid adhesive. Other than those 3 little bees that I adhered directly down to the card base. The last thing that I do to complete this card is I bring in some more of those honeybee clay hearts in pink, and I adhere those down using liquid adhesive. I do go back through all of the cards that I created and add some sparkle to the flowers and the butterflies, as well as the honeycomb, using either a sparkle jelly roll pen or the Spectrum Noir glitter overlay pen. So that will do it for my take on the Hero Arts January 2020 card kit. Unfortunately, this kit is sold out, but I hope that I've inspired you to dig into your stash and reach for something similar to create these cards. As always, I will have a link to all of the supplies that I use down below, as well as on my blog, and additional up-close photos in case you're interested in checking that out. Thank you so much for watching. I truly, truly appreciate everyone that stops by, and I'll see you next time.